Occupy Wall Street, day 10. 4 young women penned in, unable to move, unarmed, not dangerous, pepper sprayed.
People were chalking on the sidewalk and they were arrested. People who had a wooden pole for an American flag were arrested. People who were said that they were blocking the sidewalk were arrested.
The New York Police Department does what the anti-corporate protesters could not do. They make Occupy Wall Street the lead story. Good evening from New York. This is Monday, September 26th, 407 days until the 2012 presidential election. It seems like a clear-cut case of police brutality by the New York police force. 4 young women on the periphery of a peaceful march, part of the Occupy Wall Street protests, suddenly fenced in and without warning hit with a blast of pepper spray. The police say the action was performed appropriately. Videotape suggests otherwise. The 5th story on the countdown, the Occupy Wall Street protests, now in their 10th day, had received minimal coverage from national and local media. Thousands had demonstrated against a corrupt financial system, unchecked corporate power, and a divisive and ineffective political process. Hundreds have marched, and many have been arrested in a near-media blackout. That may be about to change. Hundreds, perhaps as many as 1,000 protesters took the streets on Saturday, marching from their base at Zuccotti Park in New York's financial district, north to a park that's been the scene of many political rallies of all stripes for 150 years, Union Square. Among the marchers, many who didn't fit the New York Times description of a, quote, noble but fractured and airy movement.
I'm a student. I have student debt. I worry about job prospects. And I'm also just generally concerned with the economic and political situation of our country.
I'm so tired of hearing about the country is broke when it's not broke. The oil companies are not broke. The CEOs are not broke.
These guys are stealing money from the people. They're criminals, and they belong in jail.
About 80 people were arrested along the way, charges including disorderly conduct and impeding traffic, along with inciting riot and assaulting a police officer. However, no police officers were assaulted in the incident you're about to see. Instead, a New York officer dressed in the white shirt of a supervisor walked up to 4 women just penned into place by a plastic net and deliberately fired a can of pepper spray into their faces. 2 of the women say they were temporarily blinded. Medics poured milk into their eyes to flush out the spray. One of the protesters, Chelsea Elliott, told the newspaper The Village Voice, "It was incredibly painful, like pouring a bottle of Tabasco all over your eyes and face." Ms. Elliott was not arrested. She says after the spray was fired, quote, the cops left, they moved the net. She also told The Village Voice, most of the time, the cops are really not like that. Most of the time, they're with us. New York police spokesman Paul Brown told the New York Times that pepper spray was used once after individuals confronted officers and tried to prevent them from deploying a mesh barrier, something that was edited out or otherwise not captured in the video. You saw the video. There's no evidence to support the contention of editing. Presumably, spokesman Brown might be technically correct. Some other individuals in some other place might have confronted officers and tried to prevent them from deploying that netting, but those women clearly did not, and it is beyond disingenuous for the New York City Police Department to imply so. To continue our coverage of Occupy Wall Street, I'm joined first by Kelly Heresy, one of the Occupy Wall Street protesters who took part in the march on Saturday and was himself pepper sprayed by the police. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
What happened to you?
Well, in the video you saw the women who were penned behind the orange net. I was on the opposite side of the street, and at that moment, just moments before that took place, a police officer violently threw a young African-American male onto the sidewalk and stepped on him and lifted his arms back above his head in a very awkward position and cuffed him. And I saw it, and I was completely appalled by what I was seeing, so I pulled out my camera phone and I went right up behind the police officer, and I tried to snap a picture, but there was a lot of chaos going on, and then he noticed me there and he turned around and sprayed me right in the eyes, and I was actually the first person to be pepper sprayed. Was there any explanation for it or any warning or stop and I'll spray you? No, not at all. It was I was there, and he just sprayed me in the face. What has this been? I just read the quote from Chelsea Elliott that most of the cops have not been like that. They have not been doing this. This is not something where you've gone to essentially create this kind of environment so there'd be more attention to the march, that the police have largely confined themselves within their own rules. You agree with her assessment of that? Yeah, I would agree with that completely. And our our position has been this entire time that we are not against the cops. The cops are part of the 99%. The cops, we would like to believe, are on our side because we understand that they have families, they have children, and with budget cuts, they could be losing their jobs and pensions as well. So we always try to tell the cops that we love them, we want them to be on our side, and we've always remained peaceful. But in tense situations like that, sometimes people, human nature, you just don't know how to react, and sometimes it's unfortunate that they responded violently in some cases.
Do you think there's an issue about the protest and its focus? I've been thinking about this a lot, that, again, we've said this 1,000 times, if there were 20 Tea Party protesters dressed almost identically to the way you guys are, only carrying signs that had, no more taxes or fewer taxes or lower taxes, they, for good or for ill and for whatever else cover they provide for other issues, they have an identifiable, easy to digest message for the people they're trying to get the point across to. Do you worry if Occupy Wall Street is not focused enough in that way to make the kind of impact, say, just as an example, not to say you're the liberal Tea Party or anything, but are you worried that you can't make that kind of impact because there's so many issues at hand here?
I'm not worried at all. I think the message, the media right now is focusing on the fact that it appears to be unorganized, or there isn't a concise message. But I think that's our greatest strength. I think the most interesting thing about this movement is what's happening in Liberty Plaza, or also known as Zuccotti Park, but we call it Liberty Plaza. What's going on there is we're having general assemblies, we're having an open democratic process where anyone who wants to speak has an opportunity to speak, and we decide our actions by consensus. So there's a plurality of views, there's many different opinions, and it's a work in process. It's a process right now, and eventually we will be ready to address the media with specific things. But right now we're still a very young movement, and we're growing, and eventually we'll be ready to share that.
Do you think you're getting a little traction on this, as the politicians would say? I mean, you had our friend Michael Moore is down there as we speak right now. That's speaking right. To the assembled group. Do you get that sense that things are turning in terms of what you want to accomplish?
Well, if we're talking about public opinion, then absolutely. It's like night and day with the media. We had very little exposure, but this afternoon there was cameras everywhere. I've been talking to the media all day long, and
welcome.
So, yeah, it's great. It's too bad that we have to be arrested by the police and assaulted in order to get any media exposure. But it would be nice if the media would focus on what we're the democratic process that we have going. It's really a beautiful thing. Yeah,
but you don't have any illusions about the value of one relative to the other in terms of our media today, right? I mean, Gandhi was doing this 100 years ago, 120 years ago in South Africa, let alone what he did in India. There is a way to get headlines.
Right.
So, in any event.
And we'll do what we have to do.
Take what you have to do. Kelly Heresy, part of the Occupy Wall Street protest, pepper spray victim himself. Great, thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Along with the video we showed earlier, a number of still photographers took pictures of Saturday's Occupy Wall Street protests, the pepper gas assault on protesters, and the NYPD supervisor, possibly a lieutenant, who fired the spray at the protesters. The photographer who posted these photos wrote that one of the women was hit in the with the spray, happened to be deaf, and that he can still hear her screaming in pain, sobbing, saying how much it hurt as we held her head, spraying milk into her eyes and on her face. He also says the police officers holding the net were flabbergasted by the attack and almost got hit themselves. Karen McVie joins us now, senior news reporter with The Guardian, who's covered the Occupy Wall Street protest, and she's here with us. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
You've seen this in person, and you've seen this either not covered by the U.S. media, or let me read a little of what the New York Times said. The protester was rightly frustrated but airy, and the Times portrayed a blonde woman who'd stripped to her underwear as their default ambassador. There seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between what's actually happening there and the way it's being treated by the American media. Do you have any theory on why this is?
Well, I've been down to the protests on a couple of occasions last week and this week. And I've seen a lot of things going on there. I mean, we at theguardiannews.com, we consider that there's an issue there, there's an issue going on there. There are people who are exercising their legitimate right to protest. They obviously feel that they're not being heard, you know, they're not being served by the democratic process. They feel that there's an injustice with financial institutions around them. Our readers have responded to the things that we've written about, not just in America but all around the world, and they want to be informed of this. They're interested in it and they want to read more about it. So we feel that, you know, it's something that we want to cover.
How do you see it in terms of both the international nature of protests? I mean, in this time, this is pretty tame stuff. But in this country, which I think would be described in terms of public protest as having been pacified for several decades, particularly in the decade since 2001, is this viewed as kind of the first crack in the dike? Is this the first sign of there being any kind of public protest against the way life is lived in this country now? How do you view it?
Well, it may be that it has, because of the sort of grassroots nature of it, it has a similarity with UK Uncut. In the UK, where there are protests against corporate greed, against social injustice, against things that you know, protesters feel that is important, and they feel that their concerns aren't being listened to, and those protests have sort of taken place all over the UK, and I can see similarities in the protests that are going on here.
Things, and not the direct parallels, but various protests obviously in the UK had gotten to a very high point of violence and destruction, and obviously that's not what we're seeing in New York. But what, have you seen any incidents of police, let's say, excessiveness? We don't want to put that sort of
I haven't personally seen any incidents. I wasn't there on Saturday. I've been down a couple of times. I've spoken to an awful lot of the protesters who have said either that they've been arrested, they've shown me cuts on their hands. They have claimed that the police are being very heavy-handed in their tactics. I think that there's a couple of things going on here. There's I don't know if you've seen the video, but the video of the girls the young women being pepper sprayed, that seems to me to show pretty clearly that there is something going on, that, you know, there was something, you know, that it seems clear that an officer sprayed those girls, those women, young women, and it seems that there's a case to answer. And I'm surprised that I spoke to the police, but they haven't gotten back to me about whether the case was investigated, whether the officer who was publicly named on Twitter was, you know, what the reaction to that was, whether it was indeed the officer that was named. I subsequently spoke to a lawyer who said that this officer there's a civil case, another civil case pending against him. So, you know, I've looked for answers from the police, given them an opportunity to sort of come forward and say whether or not they were, you know, and I haven't got any response.
It is fascinating. There's also that we showed the regular speed video of that, where it's kind of difficult to see what happens. There is a slowed down version on YouTube, particularly, where you can see it essentially frame by frame. There's no question as to what happened. The question of intent and why this supposed supervisor got involved is left to be debated. But it is odd in this city in which local media goes berserk at the slightest allegation of police brutality, that something like that would have occurred and gotten still relatively a small amount of notice, even in the city, let alone nationally. So it's an interesting dynamic. And Karen McVie of The Guardian, senior news reporter with that fine publication, thanks for your perspective, and again, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
You dirty hippies can't deliberately try to shut down the government. Only the Republican Party can do that. The budget crisis is suddenly solved thanks to accountants.